Chapter the 14th. Dame Haskell and I sat on the bench at the bottom of her garden and talked a good while longer. She told me that her son, my zealous father, lived in another farmhouse nearby, but I did not feel I could learn anything more by calling upon him and his wife, nor did I wish to open their wounds afresh. I concluded my visit and came away with greatest sympathy for all the Haskells, but not much the wiser as regarded Flossie. What was I to tell Tish? No plan of action, except the unsatisfactory one of trekking from asylum to asylum in search of Flossie, came to mind. Once in my hired carriage, I sat staring at the Surrey countryside without the slightest appreciation of its loveliness, and once upon the train back to London, I watched the telegraph poles fly past my window in exactly the same way. As the train slowed to pull into the Dorking station, I gazed unseeing at the people on the platform, one of whom was Sherlock Holmes. Not even disguised, he wore his country tweeds and his deerstalker hat. At first, in my days of gloom, I felt only the faintest niggling of recognition. And then I blinked, sensing that he was someone familiar, and then I gasped and shot up as if a pin had stuck me, running out of my compartment. Just as the train screeched and wheezed to a stop, I reached a doorway, shoved past the conductor stationed there, and, not wishing to call my brother's famous name aloud, I put thumb and forefinger to my mouth and blasted quite a clear, loud whistle. He turned. I waved. He saw me. So, of course, did everyone else, the expressions on their faces exhibiting how aghast they were that a female, quite properly clad in a teal traveling costume with matching hat, should behave in such an unladylike manner. So much the worse for them. I grinned as Sherlock headed towards me, carrying a valise, and, if I read his face aright, trying not to smile. "What have you been up to now, Enola?" he asked with a mock scowl, once we had achieved the privacy of our compartment. I retorted, "I might well ask you the same thing." "Indeed." Now he looked quizzical, and it took me a moment to identify an expression I had never previously seen on his face. Yes, Sherlock looked sheepish. "But there's little enough to report." "Please do report what little there is." "Let me first light my pipe." Once this was done, and once he had emitted a cloud of smoke no more noxious than usual, he leaned back in his seat and commenced his narration. "I traveled out here Friday evening, and yesterday, in the guise of a reasonably sober Irishman, I applied for a station as a groom at the Dunhenge stables. But I was turned down. I loitered to gossip, but learned nothing concerning our client's sister. I invited myself to take tea in the servants' hall, chatting up the women, but they gave nothing away except by the rigidity of their postures and the tightness of their faces. They know something, but are frightened of it. So you made no progress. Wait a moment, it gets worse. I took my leave on foot, doubled back to hide in the woods, and found a leafy dingle in which to doze until late at night, when all the lights in Dunhenge Hall had gone out. I then burgled the place. I need not bore you with details. Suffice it to say that should I ever require another career, I would make an excellent burglar. I quickly penetrated the library and opened the safe I found hidden behind a large but unlovely oil painting of an ancestral Rudcliffe. I rifled both the safe and the desk thoroughly in search of any suggestive leaf or scrap of paper, anything to reveal the whereabouts of the putative asylum to which Lady Felicity was committed, or the pseudonym under which it might have been done, but I found nothing, not the slightest indication. Finding nothing does not prove there is nothing to find. I found rather less than nothing. Having failed in the library, I stole upstairs and into Lord Cadogan's suite of rooms, their location having been revealed to me in the course of my conversation with his servants. There, with greatest stealth, I attempted to examine, by rushlight, the papers on his dresser-top and bedside table. However, he awoke, and I was obliged to flee. "Sherlock! Did he see you?" "He saw no more than something that went bump in the night, nor did anyone else, although I must say the man has an excellent pair of lungs." However, a brave lad sped off on horseback to alert the constabulary, who are scouring the countryside for suspicious persons. I thought it wise to take early leave of Three Finches, so here I am. And now, Enola, your report?" Trying to think how best to begin, I quipped, "Might I borrow your pipe?" "Nonsense, Enola." But he could not quite keep the corners of his mouth from twitching upwards. Well, Tish and I visited Bedlam and returned much shaken in our emotions and our plans, for we learned it was quite possible in any given asylum for Flossie to be in residence without our ever seeing her. There were some wards to which you were not admitted. Exactly. Also, wherever Lord Cadogan has committed Flossie, surely he is paying well to have her concealed. Have you gained any insight as to why he might have dealt with her so? Wait a minute. Today I visited St. John's to talk with the Haskells. Because the local doctor confessed on his deathbed, we now know conclusively that darling Caddy's first wife, Mizella, was indeed committed to an insane asylum where, Sherlock interrupted, with what for him must be called considerable excitement. Which asylum? It doesn't matter. The Haskells had it closed down as a pest hole. Mizella, among many others, had succumbed there to Thames River damps. Apparently Lord Cadogan then felt free to marry again. And once again, to marry below his station in life. Sherlock bit on his pipe stem and puffed hard, frowning. Most likely because he found it distasteful to talk with a female, me, about such a sensitive topic as matrimonial union. Enola, has it occurred to you to wonder why he wed Flossie Glover, no matter how pretty and talented she was, when he could have had... Apparently overcome with delicacy, he failed to complete the sentence. I endeavored to complete it for him. When he could have had any available woman, from scullery maid to maid of honor, I would respond that he is the sort of man who considers women fungible. His eyebrows shot up. I beg your pardon? Fungible. Interchangeable, one much the same as another, like cattle or clothespins or checkers on a board. Our mother taught me the word to describe a certain kind of womanizer. My dear sister, my candor shocked him. Dear brother, you know it's true. I dare say the reason Lord Cadogan did not marry a titled woman was that a woman of rank with a powerful family would have been much more difficult to discard when he tired of her. Then why marry at all? For the sake of an heir, most likely. But for some reason he quickly tired of Flossie. I imagine she was rather too decent a person for him. Sherlock puffed his pipe in silence for some time and continued to hold it in his teeth even after it went out. I watched the view from the window. We had reached the wretched Southwark slums of London. But I saw only the disturbing images in my mind. A beautiful woman barefoot, her clothing clawed to rags, her hair half pulled out by the denizens of a madhouse, and the cad of a so-called gentleman who had put her there, who had cast her off like a rag. Lord Rudcliffe, riding his high horse to hounds. Lord Rudcliffe, in an expensive smoking jacket, smiling over his wine. Lord Rudcliffe, ogling the servant girl who brought him his nightcap. As we pulled into Victoria Station, my brother blinked, roused, and pocketed his pipe. What are we to tell our client? He asked me. That we have exhausted all avenues of inquiry? There must be something we can do about that cad. My vehemence and volume surprised me. I gentled my tone. I must think, Sherlock, and I must do so without the assistance of shag tobacco. I knew myself to be tall, like my brother, and dolichocephalic, like my brother, and regrettably similar to him in profile, which is to say, proboscis. But I also knew myself to be quite unlike him in many ways, even aside from being female. Dr. Watson's accounts of my brother portrayed him as forgetting to eat when he was at his most brilliant. I, however, never forget to eat, and I believe a good meal being well digested is as significant an aid to the brain as it is to any other portion of my personage. So upon returning to the Professional Women's Club, I dined well on saddle of mutton, with mint sauce and parsley, hot potato crisps, apple dumplings, and rice pudding. Afterwards, alone in my room, I seated myself at my desk and brought out pencil and paper as unconsciously as many women take up their knitting. My mother saw to it that I was not taught to knit, crochet, embroider, or play the piano. She wanted to make quite sure that I would never become domestic or decorative. Idly, as if of my own accord, my hand started sketching, producing a nastily leering caricature of Lord Cadogan Burr Rudcliffe II's ever so handsome face. Warming to that subject, I drew him sticking out his tongue, then falling off a horse with posterior in the air, then with his coat-tails flapping as he ran after a fleeing woman, who metamorphosed as I drew her from a scullery maid to someone more like the women I had seen at Bedlam. Setting Caddy aside, I found myself drawing picture after picture of them, the so-called mad woman, barefoot, ragged, abject, slumped on benches, curled like rubbish on the floor. One of them was Flossie. Although I had never met her, I had seen her photograph and her twin sister, Tish. Filling paper after paper, I drew Flossie, thin and haggard, dressed in a heavy quilted canvas strong dress, then Flossie in rags with her long hair in a dreadful tangle hanging down, then Flossie quite lovely in an evening gown, and then Flossie in a magnificent new hat and a jacket with stylishly puffed shoulders. Opposite her I drew Tish, very smart and rather daring in a bowler, a waistcoat, a high collar, and a flowing ascot. Usually something helpful would float up from the more obscure recesses of my mind when I went on a sketching jag like this, but I knew better than to think about it. I drew Flossie again, on quite a spirited horse in a riding habit, and then Tish. But I had only just sketched in her face when something quite unusual happened. Someone knocked on my door. Papers scattered all over the floor as I arose and hurried over, calling, "Who is it?" "Tish." "Tish!" I opened the door wide, welcoming her in, so delighted to have a visitor that I forgot I had no good news for her. She stepped into my room, saw my sketches strewn across the coconut fiber matting at my feet, and exclaimed, "You drew these? They are wonderful! Don't step on them!" She crouched and started picking them up, taking a close look at each one. "I see that your opinion of Lord Cadogan agrees with mine." "Oh, you drew me!" "That's not you," I said, trying to tease a smile out of her. "That's Flossie, dressed like you." "Of course. That's why you made me pretty." Hearing a shadow in her whimsy, I protested. "Tish, you are pretty." Sitting down on the floor beside her, I picked up another drawing, the one in which I had memorialized the red wine evening gown, and joked, "This is you dressed up as Flossie." But as I spoke, as I heard my own words, something splashed and bubbled deep in my mind. I sat with my mouth open. Nor had Tish smiled, only reached for a sketch of a barefoot woman in rags. In a pained tone she said, "This may be what Flossie looks like now." "Oh," I whispered, my eyes widening like the ripples of my thoughts. "Oh, my blessed stars.